This is a screencast designed to introduce students in Year 12 studying the AQA Literature B course to issues around poetry, metre, feet, technical terms around this, based on the poetry of Robert Frost from the AQA anthology for that course. I've said on the title page here, it's an introduction to metre with an eye on AO2, and I think that's quite important. It's this sense that when students are looking at the assessment objectives for these exams, they used to talk about AO1, AO2, AO3, AO4, and so on. But AO2 is interesting. AO2, together with AO1, provide an interesting pairing, and although in the AQA exam, the separation in certain questions of AO2 from the other AOs exists, this shouldn't stop students becoming engaged with the process. I've put on the slide in front of us here examples from the Band 6 descriptors. Why not? Let's aim for A's. Let's not worry about Band 2. Let's go for the top at the moment. Appropriate critical vocabulary, technically fluent style, well-structured, coherent argument should be running through all the writing at this stage, and in order to achieve that, there needs to be a confidence about using the technical terms. They should never be thrown in, sort of like glitter on top of a cake, to sit there and rest, to say, look at all these clever words I know. They should be part of the argument, part of the discussion. And the only way that one begins to do that naturally is to become confident in usage. And the only way one becomes confident in usage is to be using them during class time, so that they form part of our everyday discussion. But the AO2 here, perhaps more interestingly, talks about exploration and analysis of key features of form and structure, perceptive evaluation of how they shape meanings. Now, I'm not really stating that you will, by following the PowerPoint or this screencast, suddenly become level 6 writers. You won't, any more than the little bits of writing that I've put on these slides are meant in themselves to be examples of level 6 writing. They aren't. They are merely explanatory passages. The point is, however, that when one's studying poetry, we have an advantage over when we're writing about prose, in the sense that poetry has a unique feature, and this is the feature that makes it poetry, the metre, the actual form of poetic language itself. So poetry has rules, sometimes. Now, we know this, and we know from our study of GCSE poetry, whatever we've done, that some poetry is what is called free verse, other poetry is, well, let's for the sake of argument call it poetry. And Robert Frost was quite clear on this as far as he was concerned. There's a famous misquote saying that writing free verse was like playing tennis with the net down. You can go off and find the original if you really want to, but the point here I think is very clear. There is a sense that whilst there still may be skills involved in writing free verse, certainly at the time that Frost said that, when free verse was coming into fashion and becoming very much a tool of the modernist poets, poets like Frost were feeling rather more conservative in their view. For him, the fact that he was writing with a regular structure and form in virtually all his poems, usually iambic pentameters or tetrameters, meant that he was always using the form and fitting his ideas within a form. Now that allows tension to be developed in curious ways, not least, as you will notice when you read Frost, the balance between everyday speech, which is how he seems to write, and the need to fit a regular rhythmic tread. And the tensions are often caused by the moments where the pattern of the metre and the pattern of everyday speech don't meet. Now, it's possible that you're feeling a little lost at this point. Please don't, bear with me. I'll try not to be ludicrously pompous and overcomplicated. It's quite an effort, really. But I'll give it a go. So let's get some of this technical lexis, some of the vocabulary that you're going to need to use out of the way. So, I mentioned on the previous slide iambic pentameter and tetrameter. So let's quickly look at these. The iamb, bit of iambic, that's what in poetry we call a foot. It's a unit of poetry. It's like a bar in music. And it consists of one unstressed and one stressed syllable. Ta-da! The second syllable being stressed. Ta-tum! However you want to say it. Put 5 of these in a row, Greek, you get a pentameter. Put 4 in a row, you get a tetrameter. The choice is yours. So, a little example I put down here. When I am teaching, all I feel is joy. A line of iambic pentameter. You can substitute joy for rage or pain to suit the mood you're in when you happen to be reading this slide. But there we go. So, we have our iamb. Done. When I am teaching, all I feel is joy. And generally, when repeated, the script that used is the little cup and line that you see at the bottom of the page there. On these slides, I will either be using that, or when I'm writing about text, I will simply put the stressed syllable into bold. So Frost chooses to write in this meter, and we don't necessarily know why. There are suggestions. It is the nearest poetic form to natural speech. I think that goes without saying. It also is said to mimic the human heartbeat, and I really don't know why that would be relevant at this point, but funnily enough it does. And if you listen to your heartbeat, if you listen to your friend's heartbeat, you will hear this going on, this sense of unstressed stress. One thing it does do, however, is flow really well when it's read aloud. And remember, with poetry, when you have the chance, read it aloud. Poetry isn't something to be skimmed over quickly in the darkness of a fetid bedroom surrounded by piles of socks. It's something to be read aloud and experienced. But even if we're doing that, it would get really, really boring if the meter never changed. So, once you've learnt the rule of the iambic pentameter, there are common variations. There are 3 or 4 of these. There's the trochaic, where you simply invert and you become stressed, unstressed. The spondy, 2 heavy stressed syllables. The pyrrhic, 2 completely unstressed syllables. And as I say at the bottom here, there's also the anapest, but he's going to turn up in a later slide, so we'll just ignore him for a little while. So, how do poets use them? To avoid the simply tedious, yes, but then a good poet shouldn't necessarily be tedious in the first place, but to avoid the simply tedious, we can vary within our meter. The trochaic is often used to emphasize key words, very often in the first foot of a line, though not always. That's the first bar, if you like, in musical terms. Though not always, you can do that wherever, and it just allows a word to change in emphasis, perhaps. The spondy is actually quite rare, and if you think how rarely you ever stress 2 adjacent syllables in everyday speech in English, you might see what I mean. The pyrrhic, it's probably a little unfair to call it a filler, but it often is. And it's often this moment, as you'll see in some of the examples, where a poet doesn't want anything to be stressed in the pair of syllables to which the pyrrhic is attached, because there is an attempt to keep the line sounding natural rather than poetical. Now, it really isn't important that you worry about where these lines come from, these terms rather come from. Just get used to using them and thinking about them, and allowing yourselves to develop this technical awareness. So the next few slides look at these meters in action. Now we start off from the poem The Axhelve. From the beginning of the Axhelve, very conversational poem as it goes on, the rhythms of the conversational speech with the French-Canadian dialect, everything will become even stronger. But here Frost is talking about, he's setting up the contexts, if you like, for his poem. I've known ere now an interfering branch, a straightforward iambic pentameter. Of older catch my lifted axe behind me. But that was in the woods, to hold my hand from striking at another alder's roots. Now, I've put 2 words in italics. The me, you'll have noticed, is an extra syllable in that line. Of older catch my lifted axe behind is the pentameter, me, thrown in at the end. The second is the was in the woods. Now, this may be, it doesn't have to be, but this may be a pyrrhic substitution. You could stress the word in, but that was in the woods to hold my hand. It's very bouncy, possibly a little too bouncy. How about, but that was in the woods to hold my hand. And if we do that, then we allow the natural rhythm to show through. So, to look at these a little more closely, the point about the spare syllable, what you will see as you read the slide we call hypermetrical syllable, is that it allows a softer ending to the line. It ends on a non-stress. Technically, it's what we call a soft or a feminine ending. And perhaps suggests, even though there's a full stop here, that the story is somehow going to continue. Obviously, if there is, if you like, an invitation to continue or respond because of that soft ending, then we have to see that somehow dealt with in the second line. To take that first, what we seem to see here is two straightforward iambic pentameters, almost responding, if you like, to the opening, almost providing a clarification to the opening statement. The opening statement sets up an idea that sometimes the axe is held by a tree in the background, and then he's setting up, if you like, clarification. But that, he says, was in the woods to hold my hand. And from this we know immediately that he's not in the woods at the time of this, and so on and so forth. The Pyrrhic there allowing the natural flow of that was in the woods. So that the poet manages to balance the wish to sound natural and conversational against the need to write in an iambic pentameter. Little substitutions, but we never lose sight of the iambic tread underneath. Looking at this one, pause it now, think about it for a while, and come back. Again, more complex. There seem to be iambs at either end of this line, but in the middle, in a yell. We know we want to stress yellow. It would be stupid if we didn't. But we've got three syllables to play with. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the anapes, the bouncy little chap. Da-da-dum! It's quite nice. It allows a certain bounce, perhaps, in the step, but really it's just there, again, as a substitution, in this case in a tetrameter, to ensure that the rhythm of natural speech is maintained through the line and that the stresses fall where the poet wishes them to. Here, trochaic substitution, amongst other things. And again, this, from out, a straightforward iambic pentameter seems to open, drives the line on, and drives it into the second line of this extract, and the stressed word leaped out at the boy's hand. And this leaped suddenly gathers power. That is the stressed word here. This is the important word. It's the unusual word. And then in the second foot of that line, because of the use of the Pyrrhic to maintain the speed and the natural feel to the speech, hand is the other stressed word in those first 3 feet. Leapt out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. He must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting. And there again, neither, another trochaic substitution, linking the two, the boy and the saw, together in that action. In the last line there, one of the things that's fun about the last line to me is that there is a caesura after the unstressed syllable there, after meeting of the fourth foot. And it's almost then, when we restart with the stressed syllable of the fourth foot, it's almost as though somehow we've done something wild and wonderful to the meter to enable the stress to fall where it does. But of course we haven't. It's actually a very straightforward iambic pentameter. It's the caesura that has enabled the stress on but to stand out and become this shock, horror, outcry of an iambic pentameter at the end of the line. You can pause whenever you want and go back and read the slides. I've tried to be as clear as I can, but what I'm trying to get across in this introduction is a sense of my excitement and enthusiasm for beginning to play with meter, and I hope it will be catching. That is enough for now. For my students, bring these ideas into class. Don't be afraid to do it. We only become confident at working in this way if we do begin to discuss, if we do take risks, if we do risk getting it wrong, in order that when we get it right, we really remember how it was that we did so. Thanks for listening.